The twin moons hung low in the alien sky, their pale light washing over the busy market of Velara. The streets were alive with voices speaking in many languages, the smell of strange spices drifting through the air. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and the few who passed through often kept to themselves. Ethan Cole, a human traveler and trader, was one of them. He had come to Velara to sell a shipment of rare metals mined from an asteroid belt. The deal had been long and tiring, but now his business was done. With a small bag of credits on his belt and a mind already thinking about his next destination, he made his way toward the landing bay where his ship, the Argus, waited. He walked through the crowd, his boots crunching against the smooth stone streets. The people around him, tall, graceful aliens with skin colors ranging from silver blue to deep emerald, paid him little attention. Some glanced his way, their eyes curious, but most were busy with their own trades. Just as Ethan turned, down a quiet side street, he heard footsteps running behind him. Before he could turn, a voice called out, trembling and urgent, "Please, human, please help!" Ethan spun around. Standing before him was a young alien girl, maybe 14 or 15 in human years. Her skin was a pale lavender shade, and her large green eyes shone with fear. She was breathing fast, her thin hands clutching a worn leather satchel. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but alert. The girl stepped closer. "My name is Lyra. My mother. She is trapped. Sky hunters took her. Please, you must help me." Ethan frowned. He had never heard of sky hunters before, but the way Lyra said the words made him uneasy. "Sky hunters," he repeated. "They are great winged beasts," Lyra explained quickly. "They live high in the cliff nests beyond the city. They take prey alive to feed their young. My mother was gathering herbs in the canyon this morning, and they came." Her voice cracked. "They carried her away." Ethan's first thought was disbelief. Winged beasts carrying away people. It sounded like a tale meant to frighten children. But the girl's trembling hands and desperate eyes told him it was no story. "Why not go to your people's guards?" Ethan asked. "I did," she said, shaking her head. "They will not go. The sky hunters are too dangerous. No one has faced them and lived. But I have heard stories of humans who fight monsters, who face danger without fear. They say you are clever and brave. Please, you are my only hope." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. He was not a hero. He was a trader, a pilot, and sometimes a smuggler. But there was something in her voice, a quiet trust, even though she did not know him, that pulled at him. He crouched slightly so he was eye level with her. "If what you're saying is true, the longer we wait, the less chance your mother has," he said. "Where are these cliffs?" 2 hours walk from the city gates," she replied. "I can guide you." Ethan nodded slowly. "All right, but first, I need to get some things from my ship." Relief flooded her face, and her eyes brightened. "Thank you, human. Thank you." They moved quickly through the city. Lyra kept glancing at the sky, as if expecting dark shapes to appear at any moment. Ethan led her to the Argus, a sleek silver ship resting in the shadow of the bay's tall docking towers. Inside, Ethan opened a storage compartment and pulled out climbing gear, a plasma crossbow, and a small drone no larger than a dinner plate. The drone's lenses glowed faintly as it powered on, hovering beside him. Lyra stepped into the ship's cabin, her gaze curious. "This is your nest?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Something like that. It's called a ship. It flies." Her eyes widened. "Like the sky hunters?" "Not quite," he said, checking the power cells in his crossbow. "But faster." When they stepped back into the warm night air, the market had begun to quiet. Lanterns flickered along the streets, and a cool wind carried the scent of the distant cliffs. Lyra led the way through narrow alleys until they reached the massive city gates. Outside, the land stretched wide and open, Strange plants with glowing tips swayed gently in the breeze, and the twin moons lit the stone path in pale silver. As they walked, Ethan asked more about the sky hunters. Lyra told him they were creatures with wingspans wider than a house, eyes sharp as blades, and talons that could carry a full-grown being into the sky. They hunted in pairs and built their nests from the branches of dead trees high on the cliff faces. "No one has ever brought back someone taken," Lyra said softly. "That is why they fear them. But I cannot leave my mother there, even if the others will not try. I will." Ethan was silent for a moment. Her words reminded him of his younger sister back on Earth, the same stubborn courage, the same refusal to give up. He had seen too many worlds where fear kept people from acting. The path began to rise, winding between jagged rocks. The sound of the city faded behind them, replaced by the faint rustle of wind and the distant cry of some unknown bird. After nearly 2 hours, the cliffs appeared, tall black shapes against the starlit sky, their jagged edges sharp as knives. From far above, Ethan thought he saw movement, dark shadows circling in the moonlight. A low, echoing screech carried through the air. Lyra stopped, her eyes fixed on the highest peak. "That is where they took her," she said, pointing. "The nest is near the top." Ethan studied the cliff face. It would be a difficult climb, even without the threat of creatures waiting above. But something deep inside told him turning back was not an option. "All right," he said finally, adjusting the strap of his crossbow. "We'll start climbing before the sun rises. The darkness will hide us." Lyra looked at him with a mix of fear and hope. "You will help her?" Ethan gave a small nod. "I'll do my best, but you need to stay close and do exactly what I say. Understand?" "Yes," she whispered. They moved to the base of the cliff, where a flat ledge gave them a place to rest. Ethan checked his gear one last time, then looked up at the towering rock above them. Somewhere in that darkness, a frightened woman waited for rescue, and deadly wings circled the sky. The night wind whispered over the stone, carrying the faint scent of something wild. Ethan tightened his grip on the crossbow. Whatever these sky hunters were, they were about to meet a human who would not run. The moons were still high when Ethan and Lyra began moving again. They had rested only long enough to drink water and catch their breath. The base of the cliffs loomed above them like the wall of some giant fortress, its black stone cutting into the sky. The wind here was stronger, carrying with it the distant cries of the sky hunters. Ethan walked ahead, scanning the path with his flashlight. The beam lit patches of dry earth, twisted roots, and stones polished smooth by centuries of wind. His small drone floated above his shoulder, its sensors scanning for movement. Lyra followed close behind, holding her satchel tight. "The nest is at the highest point," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "That is where they take all their prey." Ethan glanced back at her. "And you've been there before?" She shook her head. "No one from my people dares climb. We only see the nests from the valley, but I know the path my mother took to gather herbs. It will lead us most of the way up." The air was cooler here, and the scent of the city was long gone. Now it was replaced by the sharp, fresh smell of mountain stone and the faint aroma of flowers that glowed softly in the moonlight. Ethan paused to examine one of the plants, a tall stalk with 3 open blooms, their petals a deep blue. "Moon blossoms," Lyra said. "They open only at night. My mother uses them for healing burns." Ethan gave a small nod and kept walking. The path narrowed as they entered a canyon where the cliff walls rose steeply on either side. In the distance, he could hear the faint trickle of water. The sound was almost peaceful, but it was broken by an occasional high-pitched screech that echoed through the stone like a warning. The canyon floor became more uneven. Ethan had to use his hands to steady himself as they climbed over boulders and ducked beneath low arches of rock. At one point, Lyra stopped suddenly, her eyes fixed on the ground. "Look," she said, pointing. In the dust were 3 large claw marks, each as long as Ethan's forearm. He crouched and touched the edges. They were fresh, the stone around them slightly chipped. "They were here not long ago," Ethan murmured. Lyra's face tightened with fear. "Then we must hurry." They pushed on, moving faster despite the rough path. The canyon soon opened into a wide plateau, and from here they could see the upper cliffs clearly. The moonlight revealed massive dark shapes gliding in slow circles above the peaks. The sky hunters were watching their territory. Ethan stopped to study them. Their wings stretched far wider than he had imagined, each flap slow and powerful. Their bodies were lean but strong, with long tails that helped them turn sharply in the air. Even at this distance, he could see the glint of their eyes as they scanned the land below. "They can see far in the dark," Lyra whispered. "That is why we must move in the shadows." Ethan agreed. He led her toward the base of a steep slope that was partially hidden by a cluster of tall rock spires. The climb here was more difficult. The stones were sharp and loose pebbles shifted under their feet. Ethan kept one hand near the wall to steady himself, offering his other hand to Lyra whenever the path became too narrow or dangerous. The wind grew colder as they rose. It carried faint scents, feathers, dry leaves, and something metallic that Ethan could not place. The higher they climbed, the more he felt the presence of the creatures above. Halfway up the slope, they reached a ledge wide enough to rest. Ethan took the opportunity to pull a small scanner from his pack. He set it on the ground, and it hummed softly as it sent out a pulse. A moment later, a map of the cliff face appeared on his wrist display. "The nest is about 300 meters up from here," he said. "There's a narrow route along the right side, but it looks like the sky hunters have built more than one nest." Lyra frowned. "More than one?" "Yes. Could be 2, maybe 3, which means more of them could be up there." Her hands tightened on her satchel. "Will we still try?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment. She was scared. Anyone would be. But her voice carried no doubt. He nodded. "We'll still try." After a short rest, they continued climbing. The path became steeper, forcing them to use their hands to grip the rock. Ethan went first, driving. Small climbing spikes into the stone and attaching ropes to guide Lyra safely. The drone hovered ahead, its camera feeding a live view of the cliffs to Ethan's wrist screen. As they reached another ledge, a sudden gust of wind swept past them. With it came a sound that made Ethan's skin prickle, a deep rolling cry from above. It was answered by another, closer this time. "They know we're here," Lyra said softly. Ethan checked his crossbow, sliding a new energy bolt into place. "Then we need to move faster." The last part of the approach was the most dangerous yet. The cliff here had few handholds, and the rock crumbled easily under pressure. Twice, Lyra slipped, and each time Ethan caught her by the arm and pulled her back to safety. They moved in near silence, the only sounds their breathing and the distant flap of enormous wings. Finally, they reached a narrow shelf that curved around the side of the cliff. Beyond it, Ethan could see a faint glow, perhaps moonlight reflecting off something high above. "That's it," Lyra whispered. "The nests are just beyond that curve." Ethan crouched low and signaled for her to do the same. They crept forward, hugging the wall. Every step brought them closer to the danger ahead. As they rounded the curve, Ethan caught his first true glimpse of the nest. Even from here, it looked massive, built from thick branches, bones, and strands of some fibrous plant. It rested on a wide outcrop with sheer drops on all sides. A shadow passed over them, and Ethan instinctively pressed himself against the cliff. A huge sky hunter soared overhead, its wings catching the moonlight. The creature's head turned. Slightly, and for a moment, Ethan was certain it had seen them. But it kept flying, circling back toward the higher peaks. Ethan exhaled slowly. We'll stop here for now, he said. The next part will be the hardest. Lyra nodded, her eyes fixed on the distant nest. Somewhere inside, her mother was waiting, and above them, the sky hunters ruled the night sky. The wind whistled along the stone, carrying with it the smell of the wild. Ethan checked his gear once. More. The journey had brought them this far, but the true danger was only beginning. The narrow shelf felt like the edge of the world. One wrong step, and the drop below would send them falling into the dark void. Above, the night sky seemed closer now, the moons casting silver light over the jagged cliff walls. Ethan's heart was steady, but his mind was alert. He knew they were entering the sky hunters' territory. The drone floated ahead, its small lights dimmed to avoid drawing attention. It sent quiet clicks to scan the air currents and record movement. Ethan checked the data on his wrist display. It showed faint shapes circling above, moving in slow loops. "Stay close to the wall," he whispered to Lyra. "If they come at us, we'll need the rock for cover." Lyra nodded, her eyes wide but determined. Her hands gripped the rope tied between them, a safety measure in case one of them slipped. The cold wind pressed against their backs, carrying with it the smell of dry feathers and something sharp. Like iron, they moved carefully along the ledge, boots scraping against stone. The drone's camera caught a sudden flash of movement in the sky. Ethan looked up just in time to see a dark shadow detach from the stars, diving toward them at alarming speed. "Down!" he shouted. A sky hunter swooped past, its wings stretching, wider than the ledge itself. The wind from its dive almost knocked them over. Ethan pressed himself to the wall, his crossbow raised. The creature pulled up sharply, circling for another strike. Ethan had only seconds. He aimed and fired. The plasma bolt streaked through the air, glowing briefly before striking the cliff near the creature's path. It wasn't a hit, but the sudden light made the beast swerve away with an angry screech. Another cry came from above, deeper, more commanding. Ethan's stomach tightened. That sound meant more were coming. "Move!" he urged, and they hurried along the ledge. The second attack was faster. This time 2 sky hunters came from opposite directions. One came low, talons outstretched. The other dived from above, wings folded tight for speed. Ethan fired again, forcing the one above to veer away. But the lower attacker was almost on them. Lyra reacted without thinking. She pulled a flare from her satchel, struck it against the wall, and hurled it into the air. The burning red light burst open, spinning wildly. The sky hunter shrieked and pulled away, its eyes narrowing against the sudden brightness. "Good thinking," Ethan said, grabbing her arm as they kept moving. They reached a wider section of the ledge where a few large rocks offered some cover. Ethan signaled for Lyra to crouch behind one. The drone zipped upward, recording the movements of the creatures. The feed showed 3 of them now, gliding in large arcs above the cliffs. "They're testing us," Ethan said quietly. "They're not just attacking. They're learning how we move." Lyra's voice trembled, though she tried to sound steady. "They are hunters. They watch before they strike." A sudden rush of air came from behind. Ethan spun, crossbow ready, but this attacker didn't aim for them. It went for the drone. The creature's beak snapped, but the drone dodged, zipping higher. The sky hunter let out a frustrated cry, circling back into the darkness. "That was close," Ethan muttered, recalling the drone to a safer position. Without it, they would lose their early warning system. They took a moment to catch their breath. Lyra's hands were shaking, and Ethan realized she had never been this close to the predators before. "You're doing well," he told her. "We've made it this far, and we'll make it the rest of the way." Her eyes met his, and for a moment she looked less afraid. "If we reach the nest, do you think she'll still be alive?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He didn't want to give false hope, but he also knew that giving up now was not an option. "If she's alive, we'll bring her back," he said finally. "That's a promise." The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of wings. Ethan rose, scanning the shadows. The sky hunters had vanished from sight, which made him even more uneasy. Predators didn't give up so easily. He decided they needed to move again before the creatures regrouped. The ledge ahead narrowed sharply, then angled, upward toward a cluster of large, jutting rocks. Beyond that was another climb to the higher nesting area. As they approached the narrow section, the attack came, not from above, but from the cliff wall itself. A sky hunter shot out from a small crevice, its wings unfolding in an instant. It had been perched there silently, waiting for them to get close. Ethan fired point blank, the plasma bolt grazing the creature's wing. It screamed and thrashed, its talons scraping against the rock. Lyra ducked as one talon swiped where her head had been a second earlier. The creature pulled back, flapping hard to regain altitude. But the noise had drawn the others. In seconds, all three sky hunters were converging, their cries echoing across the cliffs. Ethan made a quick decision. "We run for the rocks, now!" They sprinted along the ledge, the rope between them pulling tight as they leaped over small gaps. The first sky hunter dived, but the narrow ledge forced it to slow, giving them just enough time to reach the cover of the large rocks. Ethan pressed his back to the stone, breathing hard. The creatures circled overhead, frustrated by the obstacles. They would have to attack from the front now, which gave Ethan a small advantage. "They don't like this space," he said, noticing how the hunters kept a careful distance from the jagged rocks. Lyra peered out from behind the stone. "Their wings are too wide. They cannot turn quickly here." Ethan smirked faintly. "Good. Then we just need to keep using that." After several tense minutes, the sky hunters seemed to lose interest. One by one, they flew higher, disappearing into the shadows above. But Ethan knew they hadn't truly left. They were waiting. When the air grew quiet again, he and Lyra continued. The next climb was steep but sheltered from the open air, which meant they could move without being seen from above. Their hands ached from gripping the rough stone, and more than once, small rocks broke away under their weight, falling into the darkness below. At last, they reached another wide ledge that looked directly toward the nesting area. In the distance, Ethan could see a huge structure of twisted branches, bones, and plant fibers. Even from here, it looked dangerous, too open, too exposed. He turned to Lyra. "We'll wait here until the wind changes. When it does, we move, in fast." She nodded, though her eyes stayed fixed on the nest. Somewhere in there, her mother might still be alive. And above them, the sky hunters were already planning their next strike. Ethan tightened the strap of his crossbow. The first attack had been a warning. The next one would be for real. The wind grew sharper as Ethan and Lyra waited on the ledge. The air carried the smell of dry feathers and the faint, sour scent of decay. In the distance, the sky hunter's nest sat high on an open outcrop, its dark shape outlined against the moon's. Ethan watched the nest carefully through his scope. The structure was massive, easily the size of a small house, woven together with thick branches, bones, and vines. Inside, he could see shapes moving. Some were small and restless, shifting with quick, jerky motions. Others were larger, slower, almost like shadows that breathed. He lowered the scope. "There are hatchlings inside," he said, "and I think your mother is there too." Lyra's hands tightened around her satchel. "You saw her?" "I saw someone bound in vines," Ethan replied. "She's not alone in there." The words made Lyra's heart beat faster. She leaned against the stone, staring at the nest as if she could will it to give her mother back. Ethan, meanwhile, was calculating every detail, the distance to the nest, the likely patrol patterns of the sky hunters, and the safest path to get close without being spotted. The wind shifted slightly, coming from behind them. Ethan knew this was their chance. "We move now," he said. "Stay low, stay close, and don't make a sound." They crept along the ledge, the nest growing larger with each step. The closer they came, the more Ethan noticed details that set his nerves on edge. Shredded cloth tangled in the branches, bits of armor half buried under twigs, and claw marks gouged deep into the stone. At last, they reached a narrow ridge that led straight to the outcrop. It was a dangerous path, only wide enough for one person at a time, with sheer drops on both sides. Ethan went first, testing each step before moving forward. Lyra followed, her eyes fixed on his back, not daring to look down. Halfway across, a shadow passed over them. Ethan froze. Above, a sky hunter glided silently, its wings catching the silver light. It circled once, then drifted away, seemingly unaware of their presence. Ethan waited until it was gone before signaling Lyra to continue. When they finally reached the outcrop, Ethan crouched behind a pile of broken branches and scanned the nest again. From this angle, he could clearly see Lyra's mother. She was lying on her side, wrapped tightly in thick green fibers, her eyes open but unfocused. "She's alive," Ethan whispered. "But the big one is here too." He pointed to the far side of the nest where the largest sky hunter stood. Its feathers shimmered with faint metallic hues, and its eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. This was no ordinary predator. It was the leader. The massive creature shifted its weight, watching over the hatchlings, its head turned toward the open sky every few seconds, scanning for danger. Ethan knew it would not hesitate to attack if it spotted them. "Here's the plan," he said quietly. "You go to your mother. Keep low and quiet. I'll draw the leader's attention. Once she's free, we run." Lyra looked at him in shock. "Draw its attention? It will kill you." "Not if I'm faster," Ethan replied. His tone left no room for argument. "Do exactly what I say, and we all walk out of here." Lyra's eyes filled with worry, but she nodded. Ethan waited for a moment when the leader looked away. Then he moved, circling to the left side of the nest. He stepped carefully over loose branches, each creak and snap making his heart race. The hatchlings hissed and chirped, but their small cries were drowned out by the wind. Lyra, meanwhile, crawled toward her mother. Her hands trembled as she reached the bound figure. "Mother, it's me," she whispered. Her mother's eyes focused slowly. "Lyra," she breathed. "It's all right. We're getting you out." She pulled a small knife from her satchel and began cutting through the tough vines. The fibers were sticky and strong, clinging to the blade, but she worked quickly. Every few seconds she glanced toward Ethan, who was now only a few meters from the leader. Ethan picked up a small rock and tossed it into the far side of the nest. It clattered loudly, drawing the leader's head in that direction. The creature let out a low growl and stepped toward the noise, its talons clicking against the wood. Ethan moved in the opposite direction, keeping its gaze away from Lyra. The leader spread its wings slightly, testing the air, and Ethan realized it was preparing to take flight. He quickly activated his drone and sent it buzzing into the air. The drone flashed its lights briefly, zipping just above the leader's head. The giant bird let out a piercing cry and lunged at it, snapping its beak. The drone dodged, weaving, back and forth, keeping the creature's attention locked. Meanwhile, Lyra cut the last of the vines. Her mother sat up slowly, wincing. "Can you walk?" she asked urgently. I think so," her mother replied. "Good. Stay low and follow me." They began crawling toward the edge of the nest, but just as they reached the outer branches, one of the hatchlings let out a high-pitched screech. The sound pierced the air like an alarm. The leader's head whipped around instantly. Its eyes locked on Lyra and her mother. With a furious cry, it spread its wings and leapt toward them. "Go!" Ethan shouted, running to intercept. He fired his crossbow, the plasma bolt striking the leader's shoulder. The creature shrieked and lashed out with one massive wing, sending a wave of air that almost knocked him over. Lyra grabbed her mother's arm and half pulled, half carried her toward the ridge. The leader followed, but Ethan threw himself into its path, jamming the crossbow between its talons and the ground. "Come on!" he yelled at them. Lyra and her mother stumbled onto the ridge, moving as fast as they could. Ethan tore the crossbow free and backed toward them, the leader advancing with slow, deliberate steps. Once they were clear of the nest, Ethan triggered the drone to fly directly into the leader's face. The sudden flash of light and whirring sound made the creature rear back, giving them precious seconds to retreat down the ridge. By the time they reached the safety of the lower ledge, Ethan's heart was pounding. The leader stood at the edge of the nest, glaring down at them with unblinking eyes. "We're not safe yet," he said, breathing hard. "It's coming after us." Lyra clutched her mother tightly, her voice shaking. "Then we run." And so they did, down the narrow paths, away from the nest, the cries of the sky hunters echoing behind them. The narrow ridge shook under their feet as they ran. Behind them, the sharp cries of the sky hunters echoed like rolling thunder. Ethan knew those cries well enough now. They were not warnings anymore. They were hunting calls. The wind roared along the cliff face, carrying the rush of wings. Ethan glanced back and saw the leader leap from the nest, its massive body cutting through the air with terrifying speed. Two other hunters followed, their wings spread wide as they descended. "Keep moving!" Ethan shouted over the wind. "Don't! Stop for anything!" Lyra gripped her mother's arm, guiding her across the dangerous path. The older woman was weak from her time in the nest, but fear gave her the strength to push forward. The first attack came from above. One of the hunters dived straight at Ethan, talons extended. He dropped to one knee and fired his crossbow. The plasma bolt streaked into the night, striking the creature in the wing. It screeched and veered away, banking hard to regain control. The leader, however, did not slow. It came in low, its talons slicing the air just behind Lyra. Ethan lunged forward, grabbing her shoulder and yanking her to the ground. The predator's talons scraped the stone where she had been standing a second earlier, sending sparks into the air. They scrambled back up, moving again before the next pass. The ridge ahead narrowed even more, forcing them into a single line. Ethan went first, guiding them along while keeping his crossbow ready. "Drone, defense mode," he commanded. The small machine zipped forward, its sensors locking on the incoming hunters. It fired bursts of bright light and high-pitched sound, disorienting the attackers. One hunter faltered mid-flight, but the others pushed through the interference. The leader roared, its voice deep and commanding. It pulled its wings in and dropped like a stone, aiming directly for Ethan. He waited until the last second, then stepped aside, letting the predator slam into the cliff wall. Stone shattered under the impact, sending pebbles tumbling into the darkness below. "Move!" Ethan urged again, his voice tight. They reached a wider section of the cliff, but the danger grew worse here. There was nothing overhead to block the hunters' approach. The three creatures circled them like shadows, their cries blending with the howl of the wind. The next attack came in perfect coordination, one from above, one from the side, and the leader from the front. Ethan had no choice but to stand and fight. He fired at the side attacker first, catching it in the chest. It spun away, flapping hard to keep from falling. Then he swung the crossbow toward the leader and fired again, but the massive predator twisted in midair, avoiding the shot. The above attacker came next, and Ethan barely had time to roll aside as it landed where he had stood. Its talons dug deep into the stone, and it hissed, feathers rising like a threat display. Lyra's mother cried out as the leader swooped low, its wing brushing her shoulder. Lyra pulled her back, but the attack left them dangerously close to the cliff's edge. Ethan's mind raced. Fighting them all head-on was impossible. They needed a way to even the odds. "Stay here," he shouted to Lyra and her mother. He sprinted toward a pile of loose rocks near the wall. The hunters followed instantly, drawn by his movement. Grabbed the largest rock he could lift and hurled it at the leader. It struck the predator's side, making it falter for just a moment. Ethan used that opening to fire another bolt, this time hitting the joint of its wing. The leader roared in pain, pulling back to regroup. But the smaller hunters were relentless. One darted in low, nearly knocking Ethan over. The other came in from behind, forcing him to spin and block with the crossbow itself. The weapon shook in his hands as the creature's beak snapped inches from his face. The drone zipped in, slamming into the side of the hunter's head. The impact distracted it just long enough for Ethan to kick it away. Meanwhile, Lyra had pulled her mother behind a cluster of rocks for cover, but one hunter spotted them and dived. Lyra reached into her satchel, pulling out the last flare. She struck it and waved the bright red flame toward the attacker. The light and smoke made the creature hesitate, allowing Ethan to fire from across the ledge and drive it back. The leader returned, circling them slowly now. Its injured wing kept it from diving at full speed, but its eyes burned with anger. It let out a sharp cry, and the other hunters regrouped beside it. "They're going to attack together again," Ethan warned. The only way out was down, a steep descent along a rocky slope just ahead. If they could reach it, they might lose, the hunters among the narrow paths. But they had to make it there first. "On my signal, run for that slope," Ethan told Lyra. She nodded, gripping her mother's arm tightly. Ethan waited until the hunters began their dive. Then he fired 3 quick shots in a wide arc, not aiming to hit but to force them to spread out. The sudden burst of light and energy made the creatures hesitate just long enough. "Now!" he shouted. They ran for the slope, the rocks shifting under their boots. The wind roared louder as the hunters gave chase. Ethan stayed at the back, firing whenever one got too close. The slope was steep and dangerous, but it offered some protection. The hunters couldn't spread their wings fully without hitting the rocks, forcing them to attack from higher angles. Ethan used that to his advantage, firing at the narrow gaps whenever they appeared. Finally, they reached a wider ledge halfway down the slope. Ethan turned and fired one last bolt at the leader, striking its shoulder again. The great predator screeched, pulling back into the open sky. The others followed, their cries echoing in frustration. For a long moment, the only sound was their breathing and the wind. Then Lyra's mother sank to her knees, leaning against the wall. "It's over?" she asked. Ethan scanned the skies. The hunters were distant now, circling their nest rather than pursuing. "For now," he said. "They won't leave their hatchlings for long." Lyra hugged her mother tightly, her voice breaking with relief. "We made it. We really made it." Ethan allowed himself a small smile, but in the back of his mind, he knew they weren't safe until they reached the city, and the journey down the mountain would be just as dangerous as the climb up. The slope below them was long and rough, littered with loose stones and sharp edges. The cries of the sky hunters still echoed faintly in the distance, but they were growing softer now, carried away by the wind. Ethan didn't let his guard down. He knew predators sometimes followed quietly, waiting for the right moment to strike again. "Stay between me and the wall," Ethan told Lyra and her mother as they began their descent. "If you slip, grab the rope. Don't look down." The moonlight painted the rocks in silver and black. Lyra's mother moved slowly, her legs trembling from exhaustion, but her eyes were steady now. She no longer looked like prey. She looked like someone determined to survive. Every few minutes, Ethan stopped to scan the sky. The leader of the sky hunters was still visible far above, gliding near its nest. It didn't follow, but its gaze seemed to track them, as if memorizing the face of the human who had dared to challenge it. The path narrowed again, forcing them to move single file. The sound of running water grew louder, and soon they reached a small stream that flowed from the mountain. Ethan knelt to fill their water bottles, letting the cold liquid wash the dust from his hands. Lyra crouched beside him. "I thought we wouldn't make it," she admitted softly. Ethan glanced at her, then at her mother resting a few steps away. "You didn't give up?" he said. "That's why we made it." Her eyes shone faintly in the moonlight. You didn't give up, either. They continued, and after another hour, the jagged cliffs began to give way to gentler slopes covered in glowing plants. The air warmed slightly, carrying the familiar scents of the lowlands. The lights of Velara twinkled far ahead, like tiny stars scattered across the ground. When they reached the edge of the canyon, Ethan slowed. "From here, it's open ground," he said. "Will be easy to spot if they come again." "They won't," Lyra's mother said quietly. "The Sky Hunters have their territory. We are leaving it now." Still, Ethan kept his crossbow, ready until they reached the first stone markers of the city's outer path. By the time they stepped under the shadow of the great gate, dawn was just touching the sky, painting the horizon in shades of gold and pale blue. The guards at the gate froze when they saw them. Their eyes widened, and a low murmur passed between them. One stepped forward, his voice filled with disbelief. She's alive?" Lyra held her mother's hand tightly. "Yes, she's alive, thanks to him." She turned and looked at Ethan, her voice full of pride. The guards stared at him, their expressions a mix of awe and uncertainty. Humans were rare in Velara, and one who returned from the Sky Hunters' cliffs was rarer still. Word of their return spread quickly. By the time they reached Lyra's home, neighbors had gathered, whispering and pointing. Some looked afraid, others amazed. No one could remember anyone coming back from the Sky Hunters' nest alive. Inside the modest home, Lyra's mother sat down with a sigh of relief. Lyra began tending to her with a mix of herbs and warm water. Ethan stood quietly by the door, not wanting to intrude. After a while, Lyra approached him. "Will you stay in Velara?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "I hadn't planned to. My ship is ready, and there's work waiting on other worlds." Her expression dimmed slightly, but she didn't look away. "You could stay for a while. My people could learn from you. About courage." Ethan smiled faintly. "Courage isn't something you learn from someone else. It's something you already have. You just have to use it." She tilted her head. "Then you taught me to use it." Before he could answer, Lyra's mother spoke from her seat. Her voice was still weak, but it carried a steady weight. "Human, our people will remember this, not just because you saved my life, but because you went where we would not go. You faced what we feared most, and you returned." Ethan inclined his head respectfully. "I didn't do it alone." The rest of the day passed quietly. Lyra's mother rested, and Ethan repaired his drone and cleaned his gear. By evening, the city's leader sent a messenger to invite him to the council hall. There, in front of the elders and many citizens, Lyra told the full story of the climb, the attacks, the nest, and the escape. When she finished, the hall was silent for a long moment. Then the leader spoke. "Ethan Cole, you are not of Velara, but you have acted as one of our own. Your courage has broken a fear that has lived here for generations." Ethan didn't seek glory, but he accepted their gratitude. They offered him gifts, precious stones, fine cloth, and rare herbs, but he took only what he could carry lightly. That night, as he walked back through the quiet streets, Lyra caught up to him. "When you leave, will you come back someday?" He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "I think I will. There's still more to see here. And besides, I owe a Sky Hunter a proper goodbye." She laughed softly at that, the sound warm in the cool night air. The next morning, Ethan stood by his ship, the Argus, as the sun rose over Velara. Lyra and her mother came to see him off. She handed him a small pouch. "Herbs from the cliffs," she said, "for healing. In case you find trouble on another world." Ethan accepted the gift with a nod. "Thank you, and take care of each other." "We will," Lyra promised. As the ship's engines warmed, Ethan took one last look at the city and the distant cliffs beyond. Somewhere up there, the sky hunters still ruled the air. But now, he knew, they would remember him as much as he remembered them. The Argus lifted into the sky, leaving the city behind. Lyra and her mother watched until the ship became a silver streak against the clouds. And though Ethan was gone, his name, and the story of the human who defied the sky hunters, would be told in Velara for many years to come.